Hi, I'm Mariel Draeven. While I was overseas completing a 2-year engineering contract in Switzerland, my parents sold my $2.4 million home to fund my brother Conan's gambling debts. Not just behind my back, they used forged power of attorney documents to do it, and worse, the buyer turned out to be someone I never expected, someone who was waiting with divorce papers the moment I returned. They stripped my name from the deed, deleted me from family photos, and told everyone I'd abandoned my responsibilities. My own mother helped orchestrate it. My bank accounts were drained. My inheritance became their solution to cover years of secret debts. They told our community I was unstable, unreachable, and no longer part of the family. But what if the sale wasn't just about money, but about destroying evidence of something far worse? What kind of parents sacrifice their daughter's future to enable their son's addiction? And why was my husband involved from the very beginning? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Swiss Alps had been beautiful in March, but nothing compared to the relief I felt stepping off the plane in Denver after 2 years away. My engineering contract with Silverbrook International had been the opportunity of a lifetime, designing sustainable infrastructure across 3 countries. I'd saved every penny beyond living expenses, planning to return home debt-free and ready to start the family Lucan and I had discussed before I left. The Uber driver wound through familiar streets toward Thornfield Heights, the exclusive neighborhood, where Lucan and I had purchased our dream home 4 years earlier. The house had cost $2.4 million, a stretch even with both our incomes, but the mountain views and custom architecture made it worth every payment. I'd worked 60-hour weeks for 3 years to make that down payment possible. As we turned onto Willowbrook Lane, my heart started racing with anticipation. I hadn't told Lucan exactly when I'd be arriving, wanting to surprise him. We'd grown distant during my time overseas, our video calls becoming shorter and less frequent, but I attributed it to the time difference and his demanding schedule at the law firm. The driver pulled into what should have been my driveway, and everything stopped making sense. A silver Mercedes sat where my car should have been parked. The garden I'd spent 2 summers perfecting had been completely redesigned with modern sculptures I'd never seen. Most jarring of all, the number on the mailbox was different. Instead of our custom-made address plaque that read, The Fairway Residence, there was a simple black number, 847. "Are you sure this is the right address?" I asked the driver, my voice tight. He checked his phone. 847, Willowbrook Lane, Thornfield Heights. This is it. I paid him with trembling fingers and stood on the sidewalk with my 2 suitcases, staring at what was supposed to be my home. The front door opened, and a woman in her 50s emerged, wearing gardening gloves and a confused expression. "Can I help you?" she asked, walking toward me. "I'm sorry. There must be some mistake," I said, my voice barely steady. "This is my house. I mean, this is where I live. I've been overseas, and I think there might be some confusion with the address." Her expression shifted from confusion to something that looked almost like pity. "Honey, I think you might be lost. We bought this house 6 months ago. Paid full asking price, no financing needed." The words hit like a physical blow. Bought this house? From whom? The previous owners were a couple going through some difficulties. The wife had moved overseas, and the husband needed to sell quickly. Cash sale, very straightforward. My knees nearly buckled. What was the husband's name? Fairway, I believe. Lucan Fairway. I stood there holding my suitcases, watching this. Stranger tend to my garden, living in my house, speaking about my husband as if I didn't exist. The woman's expression grew more concerned as I remained silent. "Are you all right? Do you need me to call someone?" "No," I managed. "I just need to make some calls." I walked to the corner of the street, set my suitcases down, and called Lucan. It went straight to voicemail. I tried again. Same result. On the third attempt, the call was answered, but it wasn't Lucan's voice. "Hello, you've reached the offices of Crestwell and Associates Legal Services. Mr. Fairway is no longer with our firm. For current legal matters, please press 1. I hung up and immediately called my parents. My mother, Silwen, answered on the second ring. "Mariel, darling, you're back. How was the flight?" "Mom, what happened to my house?" There was a long pause. Too long. "Your house?" "Sweetheart, what do you mean?" "I'm standing on Willowbrook Lane, and there's a different family living in my house. They said they bought it from Lucan 6 months ago." Another pause, then my mother's voice, suddenly careful and measured. "Mariel, I think you should come home, to our house. We need to talk." "Mom, what's going on? Where's Lucan? Why isn't he answering his phone?" "Just come home, dear. Your father and I will explain everything." The drive to my parents' house in downtown Blackwater Valley took 45 minutes, during which my mind cycled through increasingly desperate explanations. Maybe Lucan had been forced to sell due to some emergency. Maybe he'd bought us a different house as a surprise. Maybe this was all some elaborate misunderstanding that would be resolved with a few phone calls. My parents lived in the same modest 2-story colonial where I'd grown up, a house my father had inherited from his parents. When I knocked, my father, Jorvin, answered immediately, as if he'd been watching for me. "Mariel," he said, his face grave. "Come in." They sat me down in the living room, and I noticed immediately what wasn't there. The family photos that had always covered the mantel and side tables, the ones that included me, had been removed. In their place were photos of my parents with my brother Conan, vacation pictures I didn't remember being taken, holiday gatherings I apparently hadn't attended. "Where are the photos of me?" I asked, looking around the room. My parents exchanged glances. My mother spoke first. "Mariel, we need to tell you about some decisions that had to be made while you were away." "What kind of decisions?" My father cleared his throat. "Conan had some financial difficulties. Serious ones. We had to take action to protect the family." I felt a cold certainty settling in my stomach. "What does that have to do with my house?" "We used our power of attorney to access some assets," my mother said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What power of attorney? I never signed any power of attorney." "You did, sweetheart, before you left for Switzerland, for emergency situations while you were overseas." I stood up abruptly. "I signed a medical power of attorney for hospital decisions if something happened to me. Not financial. Never financial." My father pulled out a folder from the coffee table. "This is the document you signed." I grabbed it and scanned the pages. It was indeed my signature, but the document had additional pages attached, clauses I'd never seen, language about financial, decision-making, and asset management. The signature was mine, but the document wasn't what I'd signed. "This isn't what I signed," I said, my voice rising. "These pages were added later." "Mariel, you were distracted when you signed it," my mother said. "You were focused on the job, opportunity. You might not remember all the details we discussed." I would remember signing away my financial autonomy. "How much money are we talking about?" Another exchange of glances. "How much?" I repeated. "The house sold for $2.1 million, my father said quietly. "And where is that money?" "It went to resolving Conan's situation." I felt the room spinning. "All of it?" There were other debts too, things that had to be handled quickly. I sank back into the chair, the magnitude beginning to hit me. My house, my investment, my security, my future, all of it gone. Not lost, not stolen by strangers, but taken by my own family and given to my brother. "Where's Conan now?" I asked. "He's getting help. Treatment." The financial pressure was making his problems worse. And Lucan? Why didn't he stop this? Why didn't he tell me? My parents looked at each other again, and I realized there was more. "What else?" I demanded. "What else haven't you told me?" My mother reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope with my name written on it in Lucan's handwriting. He left this for you. Inside were divorce papers, already filed, already processed. I was no longer married. The document was dated 3 months earlier. I had been divorced without my knowledge, my house sold without my permission, and my family photos removed as if I'd never existed. At the bottom of the divorce papers was a note in Lucan's handwriting. The marriage couldn't survive the distance or the financial burden your family brought to our lives. I've moved on, and I suggest you do the same. I looked up at my parents, who were watching me with expressions I couldn't read. Were they ashamed? Sorry? Or were they waiting for me to accept this new reality they'd created in my absence? How long have you been planning this? I asked. Neither of them answered, which was answer enough. I stood up, gathered the papers, and walked toward the door. Where are you going? My mother called. I don't know, I said without turning around. But I'm going to figure out how to undo what you've done. As I walked to my rental car, I heard my father say to my mother, She'll understand eventually. It was the only way to save Conan. Conan. That's when I realized this wasn't just betrayal. It was a choice. They had chosen him over me, his addiction over my stability, his immediate crisis over my long-term future, and they had made that choice believing I would never find out, or that if I did, I would quietly accept it. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. They were wrong. I checked into a hotel near downtown Blackwater Valley, a mid-range place that would have to do until I figured out what resources I actually had left. The first call I made was to my bank, hoping against logic that somehow my accounts were still intact. I'm sorry, Ms. Draeven, but this account was closed 4 months ago. The funds were transferred out according to the power of attorney on file. How much was transferred? I'm not authorized to provide those details over the phone. You'll need to come in with proper identification. I hung up and tried my savings account. Same story. Then my investment account. Same story. In the span of 2 years, while I was earning excellent money in Switzerland and sending monthly payments to what I thought were our joint accounts, my family had systematically drained everything. The next morning, I drove to First National Bank of Blackwater Valley, where I'd done business for over a decade. Janet Morrison, the branch manager, had always been friendly when I'd come in for loan paperwork or investment consultations. Today, she looked uncomfortable the moment she saw me. Mariel, I heard you were back. How was Switzerland? It was productive until I came home and discovered I don't exist anymore. Her smile faltered. I'm sorry? My accounts, Janet. I need to see the transaction history for all my accounts. Of course. Let me pull those up. She clicked through several screens, her expression growing more troubled. These accounts were closed with proper authorization. The power of attorney documentation was all in order. Show me. She printed out several pages and handed them over. The numbers were devastating. Over the 2 years I'd been gone, $847,000 had been transferred out of my accounts. My house sale had generated $2.1 million. My 401k had been cashed out for another $180,000. In total, more than $3 million of my assets had been liquidated. Where did it all go? I asked. Janet pulled up another screen. The largest transfers went to an account at Crimson Ridge Casino Resort. The rest went to various creditors and what appears to be a legal settlement firm, Crimson Ridge. I'd heard Conan mention it before, usually in the context of some big win he'd had, though he'd never seemed to actually have any money. Now I understood why. Janet, I need copies of all these records, and I need to know who authorized each transfer. I can provide the records, but Mariel, I have to tell you something else. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. Your parents came in several times during the process. Your mother seemed very upset. But your father insisted everything was necessary. They mentioned that you'd been having some difficulties overseas, that you weren't responding to communications consistently. What kind of difficulties? They said you'd been struggling with the isolation, that you'd made some poor decisions with your job, and that you'd ask them to handle your financial affairs because you were overwhelmed. I stared at her. They told you I was having a breakdown. They were worried about you. They said the family needed to step in before you made decisions that would hurt everyone. I realized then that this wasn't just theft. It was character assassination. While I was successfully managing multi-million-dollar infrastructure projects in 3 countries, my family was telling everyone I knew that I was unstable and incompetent. Janet, did I seem unstable to you when I set up these accounts? No, of course not. You were always very professional, very clear about your goals. And does someone having a breakdown typically continue to make regular deposits into their accounts? For 2 years? She looked uncomfortable. I suppose not. I left the bank with a folder full of financial records that painted a picture of systematic theft, but I realized the money was only part of the problem. My reputation had been destroyed, as deliberately as my accounts had been emptied. My next stop was Crestwell and Associates, the law firm where Lucan had worked. The receptionist, a young woman I didn't recognize, looked confused when I asked about him. Mr. Faraway left the firm about 4 months ago. I think he relocated. Relocated where? I'm sorry, I don't have that information. I asked to speak with Thomas Crestwell, the senior partner who had hired Lucan originally. After a 20-minute wait, he emerged from his office, his expression carefully neutral. Mariel, I heard you were back from your overseas assignment. Tom, where's Lucan? He gestured toward his office, and we sat across from his desk. Lucan made the decision to relocate after the divorce was finalized. He felt it was better for both of you to have some distance. The divorce I didn't know about. Tom's expression didn't change. Mariel, I think we both know the marriage had been struggling for some time. The separation while you were overseas made it clear that you'd grown in different directions. What separation? I was working overseas. That's not separation, that's long-distance marriage. According to Lucan, you'd stopped communicating regularly. You'd missed important family events, forgotten anniversaries, stopped participating in your shared financial planning. I felt that familiar cold certainty again. Tom, I called Lucan every week. I sent anniversary flowers. I made deposits into our joint account every month. I think Lucan's experience was different. Where is he now? I believe he's in California. He took a position with a firm in San Diego. I left the law office understanding that Lucan hadn't just abandoned our marriage. He'd created a narrative that justified the abandonment. According to his version of events, I was the one who had checked out, who had failed to maintain our relationship, who had forced his hand. That afternoon, I drove through Thornfield Heights, again, looking more carefully at my former neighborhood. I stopped at the community center where I'd volunteered before leaving for Switzerland, hoping to find someone who might remember me, who might have wondered what happened to me. Sarah Chen, who had coordinated the neighborhood watch program, was working in the garden outside the center. She looked up as I approached, and her expression went through a range of emotions. Recognition, confusion, and something that might have been guilt. Mariel, what are you doing here? I live here, or I used to. I just got back from Switzerland. But Lucan said you'd decided not to come back. He said you'd found work in Europe and wanted to stay. When did he tell you that? About 6 months ago, when he was dealing with the house sale. He seemed really broken up about it. Said you'd grown, apart and that you'd decided to build a life over there. Sarah, did that sound like something I would do? Just disappear without saying goodbye to anyone? She looked uncomfortable. It seemed sudden, but people change when they're going through difficult times. What difficult times? What did he tell you about difficult times? He said you'd been struggling with depression, that the job overseas had been more stressful than you'd expected, and that you'd started making impulsive decisions. There it was again, the mental health angle. While I was thriving professionally and personally in Switzerland, learning new languages, managing complex international projects, and building relationships with colleagues from around the world, my husband was telling everyone I was depressed and making poor choices. "Sarah, did you ever try to contact me? To check on me? Lucan said you'd asked people not to reach out, that you needed space to figure things out." I realized then that my isolation hadn't been accidental. It had been orchestrated. Every relationship I'd maintained in Blackwater Valley had been systematically poisoned with stories about my mental state, my abandonment of responsibilities, my decision to cut ties with my old life. That evening, I sat in my hotel room with all the documents spread across the bed. Financial records showing the systematic draining of my assets, divorce papers filed without my knowledge, real estate documents transferring my house to strangers, and underneath all of it, a coordinated narrative that painted me as unstable, unreliable, and voluntarily absent from my own life. I called my brother's number, one I still had from before I left. It went to a disconnected message. I tried social media, but his accounts had been deactivated. According to my parents and everyone else I'd spoken to, Conan was getting help, but no one could tell me where or when he might be reachable. I started making a list of questions that needed answers. How much did Conan actually owe, and to whom? When did the gambling debts become serious enough to justify stealing my house? How long had my parents been planning this? Why had Lucan agreed to participate instead of protecting me? Who else knew about the plan? What other assets had been liquidated that I didn't know about? Where was the money now? As I wrote, I realized that the 2 years I'd been gone hadn't just been a period of theft. They'd been a period of preparation. My family, my husband, and apparently much of my community had spent 2 years building a version of reality in which I didn't exist as a competent adult with rights and relationships. The question now was whether that version of reality was permanent, or whether I could prove that it had been constructed on lies. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Heard you were back in town. Some things are better left buried. Move on." I stared at the message, realizing that my investigation was already making someone nervous. That meant I was on the right track. The text message bothered me all night. By morning, I'd decided to drive to my parents' house again, but this time I wasn't going to let them control the conversation. I needed to understand not just what they'd done, but why they thought they had the right to do it. I arrived at 7 a.m., knowing they'd be having coffee in the kitchen, following the same routine they'd maintained for 30 years. When my mother answered the door, she was still in her robe, her face drawn with exhaustion. "Mariel, it's early. We need to talk, all of us, right now." My father appeared behind her, already dressed for work. "Mariel, your mother and I have discussed this situation extensively. We know you're upset, but we did what was necessary." Necessary. For whom? I pushed past them into the kitchen, where I could see evidence of the conversation they'd been having before I arrived. Financial documents were spread across the table, and I could see Conan's name on several of them. "How long has this been going on?" I asked, gesturing to the papers. My mother sighed. "Conan's been struggling for 3 years. At first, we thought it was just bad luck, some poor investments. We helped him a few times, small amounts." "How small?" "10,000 here, 15,000 there," my father said. "We used our retirement savings." I sat down at the table and started looking through the documents. Credit card statements with Conan's name showing transactions at casinos, online gaming sites, and cash advance locations. Legal notices from creditors. Threatening letters from collection agencies. "How much did you give him in total?" My parents looked at each other. "About 80,000, my mother said quietly. $80,000 from your retirement, and it wasn't enough. The gambling got worse after he lost his job, my father explained. He kept saying he just needed one big win to get even, to pay us back and get his life together. I found a letter dated 18 months earlier, from something called Pacific Recovery Solutions. It was addressed to my parents and outlined a payment plan for $340,000. What's Pacific Recovery Solutions? They're the people Conan owed money to, my father said. Not just for gambling losses, but for loans he'd taken from private lenders to cover gambling losses. $340,000. It was that, or... My mother's voice trailed off. Or what? They made it clear that Conan's safety was at risk if the debt wasn't resolved quickly. I stared at them, understanding finally dawning. You sold my house to pay off his gambling debts because loan sharks were threatening him. We were trying to save his life, my mother said, tears starting to flow, by destroying mine. We thought you were doing well in Switzerland. You seemed happy, successful. You didn't need the house the way Conan needed our help. I stood up, feeling a rage so pure it was almost clarifying. I didn't need the house. I didn't need my life savings. I didn't need my marriage. I didn't need to be consulted about decisions that affected my entire future. You were unreachable, my father said. We tried to call you several times, but you never called back. When? When did you try to call me? He went to his phone and showed me the call log. There were 3 attempts to reach me, all on the same day, all lasting less than 10 seconds each. You called 3 times on one day 8 months ago and left no messages. That's your attempt to reach me? We thought you were avoiding us because you'd guessed what was happening. I realized we were talking past each other because we were living in different realities. In their reality, I was a successful professional who didn't need their support and could easily rebuild whatever was lost. In my reality, I was someone who had worked for 15 years to build financial security, who had trusted them to respect my independence, who had assumed my family would protect rather than exploit my absence. Let me ask you something, I said, sitting back down. If Conan had owned the house and I was the one with gambling debts, would you have sold his house to save me? The pause told me everything I needed to know. That's different, my mother said eventually. How is it different? Conan is more vulnerable. He's always needed more support. More vulnerable than your daughter who was living alone in a foreign country? You've always been stronger, more independent. So my independence disqualifies me from protection, but his dependency entitles him to my assets? Neither of them answered, but I could see in their faces that this was exactly how they'd rationalized it. My success had made me fair game for sacrifice. My competence had made my consent unnecessary. My independence had made my financial destruction acceptable. Picked up my phone and called Conan's old number again. This time, instead of the disconnected message, it rang, and he answered. Hello? Conan, it's Mariel. Silence. I'm back from Switzerland. I know about the house, the money, all of it. Mariel, I can explain. Where are you? I'm at a facility. A treatment center. I've been here for 4 months. Which facility? Serenity Springs, about an hour outside the city. I'm coming to see you. Mariel? Wait. I know you're angry, but you have to understand. I didn't have a choice. There's always a choice. I'll be there in 2 hours. I hung up and looked at my parents. I'm going to talk to Conan. When I get back, I want a complete accounting of every dollar that was taken from me, where it went, and what's left. Mariel, my mother said, we're still your family. We love you. You sold my house while I was overseas and told everyone I was having a mental breakdown. If that's love, I don't understand the word. The drive to Serenity Springs gave me time to think about what I was going to say to my brother. I'd always protected Conan, even when we were kids. When he got in trouble at school, I'd help him with his homework. When he struggled to find jobs, I'd put in good words with my contacts. When he'd asked to borrow money over the years, I'd usually said yes. But I'd never realized that my willingness to help had been interpreted as an obligation to sacrifice. Serenity Springs was a modest facility surrounded by pine trees, the kind of place that looked more like a resort than a treatment center. Conan was waiting in the visitor's lounge when I arrived, looking thinner than I remembered, but healthier in some indefinable way. "You look good," I said, sitting across from him. "I feel better than I have in years. Mariel, I know what Mom and Dad did was wrong." "Do you?" "Because they seemed to think it was necessary. It was the only way they could see to save me without destroying themselves. So they destroyed me instead." He looked down. "I told them not to touch your money. I said I'd figure something else out." "What changed their mind?" The threats got more specific. These weren't just collection agencies. Pacific Recovery Solutions has connections to people who don't accept payment plans. "How did you get involved with them?" "It started online. Small bets, just for entertainment. Then I started going to Crimson Ridge with some guys from work. I thought I understood the odds. Thought I could be smart about it. But you couldn't." "No. And every time I lost, I was sure the next bet would get me even. So I borrowed money to keep playing." "How much did you actually lose gambling?" "About 200,000. But the interest and penalties on the loans brought it up to the full amount." I looked at my brother, this person I'd spent my life protecting, and tried to find some way to understand how we'd gotten to this point. "Conan, did you know they forged documents to access my accounts?" "I knew they'd used a power of attorney. I thought you'd signed it." "I signed a medical power of attorney. They added financial clauses." His face went pale. "I didn't know that." "Did you know they told everyone I was having a breakdown, that I was unstable and had abandoned my responsibilities?" "I heard them talking about it, but I thought they were just trying to explain why you weren't coming back for holidays." "And Lucan? Did you know he was going to divorce me?" "I knew he was angry about the house sale. He said he couldn't be married to someone whose family would put him at financial risk." I realized that even Conan didn't understand the full scope of what had been done in his name. He'd been told enough to feel guilty, but not enough to understand the systematic nature of the betrayal. "The treatment center, how much does it cost?" $30,000 for the full program. So of the $3 million taken from me, about $300,000 went to your creditors, $30,000 went to your treatment, and the rest went where? "I don't know. You'd have to ask Mom and Dad." We sat in silence for a while. Finally, I asked the question I'd been avoiding. "If you had it to do over again, knowing what it would cost me, would you still take the money?" He was quiet for a long time. "I don't know how to answer that. I wanted to die, Mariel. I was planning to kill myself. When they said they could save me, I didn't think about the cost to anyone else. And now? Now I understand that my recovery came at the expense of your life. I understand that every day I get better, you're dealing with the consequences of my choices. I understand that's not sustainable for either of us." "What does that mean?" "It means when I get out of here, I'm going to do whatever I can to help you get back what was taken. And if that's not possible, then I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you. As I drove back to Blackwater Valley, I realized that my conversation with Conan had clarified something important. This wasn't really about the money, though the money mattered. This wasn't even about the house, though the house had been my security. This was about whether my family saw me as a person whose consent was required for decisions about my life, or as a resource to be managed for the benefit of others. And the answer to that question would determine whether there was any relationship worth rebuilding. I spent that evening in my hotel room creating a timeline, not just of the thefts, but of all the conversations, decisions, and small betrayals that had made the larger betrayal possible. What I discovered was that this hadn't been a crisis response to Conan's gambling debts. It had been a carefully orchestrated campaign that began before I even left for Switzerland. The next morning, I drove to the office of Travis Dierich, a private investigator I'd found online who specialized in financial fraud cases. His office was in a converted warehouse downtown, and he looked exactly like what I'd expected. Mid-50s, beard, suspicious eyes, and a desk covered with case files. "Ms. Draeven, You mentioned on the phone that your family stole your house? Among other things. I laid out all the documents I'd gathered: the forged power of attorney, the bank statements, the real estate transfer, the divorce papers, and the threatening letters to Conan. Travis examined each document carefully, occasionally making notes or taking photos with his phone. How much total are we talking about? Just over $3 million in assets, plus the value of my reputation and marriage. And you want to know what exactly? I want to know if there's more I don't know about. I want to understand how long this was planned. And I want to know if any of it can be undone. The forgery alone is a felony. If you can prove the power of attorney was altered after you signed it, that's criminal fraud. How do I prove that? Document forensics. We can analyze the paper, the ink, the printing. If different pages were added later, or if text was added to existing pages, we can usually detect it. What about the money that's already gone? Depends where it went and whether it's recoverable. The casino won't give back gambling losses, but if money went to pay fraudulent debts or was transferred to accounts your family controls, that might be recoverable. I need you to find out everything. I need to know the full scope. My rate is $200 per day plus expenses. This kind of investigation usually takes 2 to 3 weeks. Do it. I left Travis's office feeling like I'd finally taken a step toward fighting back rather than just absorbing damage. But I also realized I needed legal representation. Someone who could help me understand what options I had and what remedies might be available. Dahlia Quenrick had been recommended by 3 different people when I'd asked about attorneys who handled family financial disputes. Her office was in the historic district, in a renovated Victorian house that had been converted to legal offices. Dahlia was younger than I'd expected, probably early 40s, with silver streaks in her black hair and the kind of direct manner that suggested she didn't waste time on pleasantries. "I've seen cases like this before," she said after reviewing my documents, "usually involving elderly parents whose assets are stolen by adult kids, but the mechanics are the same. What are my options? Criminal charges for forgery and fraud, civil lawsuit to recover assets, potentially a civil RICO case if we can prove ongoing criminal enterprise." Criminal enterprise? If your family, your ex-husband, and potentially others work together over time to systematically steal your assets while destroying your reputation, that could qualify as organized criminal activity. What would I need to prove that? Evidence of coordination, communication between the parties, planning that extended over time, and efforts to conceal the activity. The private investigator is looking into those things now. Good. In the meantime, I want to file an emergency motion to freeze any assets that might still be recoverable and to put the court on notice that fraud has occurred. Will that accomplish anything? It starts the legal clock ticking and creates a record. If your family thinks you're just going to go away quietly, this will let them know they're wrong. That afternoon, I drove to Crimson Ridge Casino, about an hour outside Blackwater Valley. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I wanted to see the place where so much of my money had ended up. Crimson Ridge was exactly what I'd expected. Flashing lights, carpeted halls that seemed to go on forever, the constant sound of slot machines, and electronic gaming. I found the customer service desk and asked to speak with a manager. "I'm trying to trace some gambling activity by a family member," I explained to the manager, a woman named Sandra who wore a name tag identifying her as guest relations supervisor. "I'm sorry, but we can't discuss specific customer accounts. Even if fraud was involved, you'd need to work with law enforcement for that kind of inquiry. Can you tell me generally how much someone would have to lose here to owe $200,000? Sandra looked uncomfortable. "Our customers don't typically carry that kind of debt with the casino directly. If someone owes that much, it's usually to private lenders who operate in the area. Private lenders, people who loan money to gamblers at high interest rates. It's legal but risky for the borrowers. Is that what Pacific Recovery Solutions is?" Her expression changed. "I can't comment on specific businesses, But if someone in your family was dealing with those kinds of debts, they were in serious trouble. I left the casino understanding that Conan's situation had been even more dangerous than my parents had indicated. He hadn't just been gambling away money. He'd been borrowing money from dangerous people to gamble with, creating a spiral that could only end in financial ruin or worse. But understanding the danger he'd been in didn't change the fact that my family had decided to transfer that danger to me without my knowledge or consent. That evening, Travis called with preliminary findings. Your power of attorney document was definitely altered. The original document was 2 pages. 3 additional pages were added later, using different paper and different ink. Can you prove it in court? Yes. But there's something else you need to know. I found records of other financial activity in your name. What kind of activity? Credit cards were opened using your identity while you were overseas. About $180,000 in additional debt was created. I felt that familiar sensation of the ground shifting under my feet. Who opened them? The applications were submitted online using your personal information, but the cards were mailed to an address I traced to your ex-husband. Lucan was committing identity theft? It looks that way. And there's more. He used those credit cards to pay off some of his own debts, including legal fees for the divorce proceedings. He paid for his divorce lawyer with credit cards opened in my name? Among other things. And here's the interesting part. The debt consolidation he arranged happened 3 weeks before the house sale was finalized. Meaning what? Meaning he knew about the house sale before it happened, and he was positioning himself to benefit from it while sticking you with additional debt. I realized that Lucan hadn't been a passive participant in my family's betrayal. He'd been an active collaborator, using their actions to cover his own financial crimes. Travis, I need you to find out everyone who was involved in this. I need to understand who knew what and when. I'm already on it. But Mariel, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that this goes deeper than your immediate family. What do you mean? Some of the financial transactions required cooperation, from bank employees, real estate agents, possibly lawyers. This wasn't just family members taking advantage of a power of attorney. This was a coordinated effort involving multiple people in the financial services industry. After I hung up, I sat in my hotel room trying to process the scope of what had been done to me. This wasn't just theft by desperate family members. This was an organized criminal enterprise that had involved identity theft, forgery, fraud, and potentially corruption of financial institutions. And all of it had been done while I was overseas, working successfully, sending money home, and believing that my family and husband were protecting my interests in my absence. The question now wasn't whether I could recover financially from what had been done to me. The question was whether I was strong enough to take on the entire network of people who had collaborated in destroying my life. My phone buzzed with another text from the unknown number. Stop asking questions. You won't like the answers. I screenshotted the message and forwarded it to Travis. Then I texted back, "Try me." The response to my text came within minutes. Room 247, Blackwater Inn. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., come alone. I stared at the message, realizing that whoever had been watching my investigation was ready to move from threats to direct confrontation. But I wasn't the same person who had stepped off the plane a week earlier, confused and devastated. I was angry now, and I was prepared. I called Travis immediately. I'm meeting with whoever's been sending the threatening texts tomorrow afternoon. That's not smart. We don't know who we're dealing with. We're about to find out. I need you to be nearby, and I need everything we've discovered so far documented and stored somewhere safe. Mariel, if these are the same people who threatened your brother, this could be dangerous. Everything about this situation is dangerous. At least this way, I get answers. The next morning, I met with Dahlia to review our legal strategy. She'd already filed the emergency motion to freeze assets, and the court had granted a preliminary order. What does that mean practically? I asked. It means any accounts in your family's names are now under court supervision. They can't move large amounts of money without justification. Will that help recover what's already gone? Not directly, but it prevents them from hiding additional assets while we build our case. Dahlia, I need to ask you something. If this case involves corruption in local financial institutions, are you prepared to take that on? What have you found? The private investigator thinks some of the fraud required inside cooperation. Bank employees, maybe real estate agents, possibly others. If that's true, this becomes a much bigger case, and a much more dangerous one. Dangerous? How? People who commit financial fraud on this scale usually have political connections, law enforcement connections, or both. They don't stay in business this long without protection. Are you telling me to back down? I'm telling you to be realistic about what you're up against and to make sure you're prepared for the consequences of winning. That afternoon, I arrived at the Blackwater Inn early and checked out the layout. Room 247 was on the second floor, accessible by stairs or elevator, with windows facing the parking lot. Travis was positioned across the street with a clear view of anyone entering or leaving. At exactly 2 p.m., I knocked on the door. It was opened by a man in his 60s, well-dressed in an expensive suit, with silver hair and the kind of confident. Bearing that suggested he was used to being in control. Ms. Draeven? Thank you for coming. Who are you? My name is Kenneth Valdris. I'm a business consultant. What kind of business? The kind that solves problems for people who can afford. Solutions. He gestured for me to sit in one of the chairs near the window. The room was set up like a business meeting, with a small table between us and documents laid out in organized stacks. You've been asking a lot of questions about your family's financial situation. I've been trying to understand how $3 million of my assets disappeared, and you've discovered that the situation is more complicated than simple family betrayal. I've discovered that it's criminal fraud involving multiple people, which is why we need to talk. The people your brother owed money to, the people who facilitated the transactions that resolved his debts. We all have an interest in seeing this situation handled quietly. By quietly, you mean covering it up. By quietly, I mean finding a solution that protects everyone involved, including you. He slid a document across the table. This is a settlement offer. I looked at the papers. It was an agreement to accept $500,000 in exchange for dropping all legal actions and signing a non-disclosure agreement that would prevent me from discussing any aspect of the case. You're offering me $500,000 of my own money in exchange for staying quiet about how $3 million was stolen. I'm offering you a guaranteed recovery and the ability to move on with your life, instead of years of litigation with uncertain outcomes. What makes you think the outcomes are uncertain? Kenneth smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. Ms. Draeven, you've been overseas for 2 years. A lot has changed in Blackwater Valley. The financial institutions your family worked with, the legal firms that processed the transactions, the real estate companies that handled the sales, they're all part of a network that has been operating successfully for decades. A network of criminals. A network of people who understand that sometimes unconventional solutions are necessary to resolve complex problems. And if I don't accept your offer? Then you'll discover that your legal options are more limited than you might expect. You'll find that evidence disappears, that witnesses become unavailable, that judges have conflicts of interest. You're threatening me. I'm educating you about how things work in the real world. I looked at the settlement offer again, understanding that this was likely my only chance to recover any significant amount of money. But I also understood that accepting it would mean everyone who had betrayed me would face no consequences, and that other people in similar situations would continue to be victimized. I need to think about it. Of course, but don't take too long. Offers like this have expiration dates. As I stood to leave, Kenneth added, Your brother is doing well in treatment. It would be unfortunate if his recovery was interrupted by unnecessary legal complications. Are you threatening Conan now? I'm pointing out that your family's situation could become more complicated if you insist on making this matter public. I left the hotel room understanding that I was facing not just a criminal conspiracy, but an organized system of corruption that extended throughout the local business and legal community. But I also understood that I'd been given information I could use. I called Travis immediately. Did you get photos of the man who met with me? Yes, and I ran them through facial recognition software. Kenneth Valdres is a lawyer who specializes in what he calls alternative dispute resolution. He's been investigated by the state bar multiple times but never sanctioned. What does that mean? It means he has protection, probably political. But it also means he's been on law enforcement's radar for years. Travis, I need you to find out everything you can about this network he mentioned. I need to know how deep this goes. Already working on it. But Mariel, you should know that 3 other people have contacted me in the last 24 hours. What kind of people? People who've had similar experiences. Family financial fraud, identity theft, threats when they tried to fight back. Word is getting out about your case, and other victims are coming forward. That evening, I met with 2 of these other victims at a coffee shop downtown. One was a woman named Sarah Malthorne, whose business partner had stolen her company while she was undergoing cancer treatment. The other was a man named David Kelrick, whose parents had liquidated his inheritance to cover his sister's medical debts. The same pattern every time, Sarah explained. They wait until you're vulnerable or absent, they create fake legal authorization, they steal everything, and then they destroy your reputation so no one believes you when you complain. And when you try to fight back? I asked. Mysterious legal complications, David said. Evidence disappears. Witnesses change their stories. Judges recuse themselves due to conflicts of interest. But you kept fighting. What choice did we have? These people don't just steal your money. They steal your entire identity, your relationships, your place in the community. Have any of you had success getting justice? Sarah and David looked at each other. Not yet, Sarah said. But we've been waiting for someone with your resources and visibility to take them on. My resources? I'm broke and homeless. You're not broken, David said, and you're not giving up. That makes you dangerous to them and valuable to us. As I drove back to my hotel, I realized that Kenneth's settlement offer had actually been a gift, though not in the way he'd intended. By trying to buy my silence, he'd confirmed that there was something worth staying silent about. By threatening my family, he'd revealed that the network was vulnerable to exposure. By offering me money, he'd proved that they had access to more resources than they'd admitted. Most importantly, by meeting with me at all, he'd proved that my investigation was making them nervous. I called Dahlia from my hotel room. I want to reject the settlement offer, but I want to do it in a way that maximizes the legal leverage. What kind of leverage? I want to make it clear that I know about the broader network, that I have evidence of their operations, and that I'm not going to be intimidated. Are you sure? Once you reject that offer, there's no going back. This becomes a fight to the finish. It was always going to be a fight to the finish. They just gave me better weapons. The next morning, I sent Kenneth Valdres a response to his settlement offer. I reject your offer. I will be pursuing all legal remedies available, including criminal prosecution of everyone involved in the systematic theft of my assets. I will also be working with other victims to expose the network of corruption that has been operating in this community. If you have evidence to offer about the crimes that were committed, I'm willing to listen. If you continue to threaten me, or my family, I will add those threats to the criminal complaint I'm filing with the State Attorney General's office. Within an hour, I received a response. You're making a serious mistake. I forwarded the message to the FBI's Financial Crimes Task Force, along with all the evidence Travis and I had gathered so far. Then I called a press conference for the following day. It was time to stop reacting to what had been done to me and Start taking control of what happened next. The press conference was scheduled for 10 a.m. at the Blackwater Valley Community Center. By 9:30, reporters from 3 local news stations had arrived, along with a journalist from the state newspaper who had been following financial fraud cases across the region. I had spent the morning reviewing my strategy with Dahlia, making sure every statement I planned to make was legally protected. "Remember," Dahlia had said, "stick to facts you can prove. Don't accuse anyone of specific crimes unless we have documentation. But as I prepared to face the cameras, Travis called with news that changed everything. "Mariel, you need to see what I found in Kenneth Valdris's background. He's not just a consultant. He's been working as a fixer for a group of investors who specialize in distressed asset acquisition." "What does that mean?" "They target families in financial crisis, help orchestrate the crisis if necessary, then swoop in to buy valuable assets at below-market prices. Your house wasn't just sold to pay Conan's debts. It was sold to specific buyers who knew exactly what they were getting." I felt the familiar sensation of the ground shifting, but this time it was different. This time I was the one with new information. "Who bought my house, Travis?" "Really?" "A shell company controlled by Kenneth Valdris and 2 local real estate developers. They've been flipping high-end properties this way for years. So the gambling debts were real, but the sale was orchestrated to benefit specific buyers." "Exactly. And here's the smoking gun. I found email communications between Valdris, your ex-husband, and your father dating back 8 months before the sale. They were planning this while you were still sending money home from Switzerland." I asked Travis to send me the emails immediately. As I read them on my phone, I understood that every conversation I'd had with my family, every reassurance they'd given me about handling things while I was away, had been part of a coordinated deception designed to keep me from interfering with their plan. But now I held evidence that would destroy all of them. The press conference began with my prepared statement about family financial fraud, but halfway through, I made a decision that surprised even Dahlia. I deviated from the script. "This case is about more than one family's betrayal," I said, looking directly into the cameras. "It's about a network of individuals who systematically target vulnerable families, manufacture financial crises, and profit from the destruction of people's lives. I have evidence of organized criminal activity involving real estate fraud, identity theft, and corruption of financial institutions." The questions from reporters became more urgent. "What kind of evidence? Who else is involved? Have you contacted federal authorities?" "The FBI Financial Crimes Task Force is now investigating. Anyone who has experienced similar fraud in the Blackwater Valley area should contact them directly." After the press conference, my phone immediately started buzzing with calls and messages. But the most important message came from an unknown number. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." I screenshot the message and forwarded it to the FBI agent who had been assigned to the case. Then I called Kenneth Valdris directly. "Mr. Valdris, this is Mariel Draeven. I believe you have something that belongs to me." "Ms. Draeven, you've chosen to make this very difficult for everyone involved. I've chosen to tell the truth. The question now is whether you want to be part of the solution or part of the prosecution." There was a long pause. "What are you proposing?" "Full disclosure of all the assets acquired through fraudulent transactions, complete cooperation with federal investigators, and personal accountability for everyone who participated in stealing from my family and others." "And if I refuse?" "Then you'll discover that I'm much better at playing this game than you expected. I have evidence of your communications with my family, your financial relationships with the buyers of my property, and your involvement in at least 6 other similar cases. The only question is whether you want to minimize the damage or maximize it." Another pause. "We should meet. No more hotel rooms. My lawyer's office. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. Bring your attorney and all the financial records related to my case." As I hung up, I realized that for the first time since returning from Switzerland, I was the one setting the terms of the conversation. The power dynamic had shifted completely. And everyone involved in betraying me now understood that I wasn't just fighting to recover my losses. I was fighting to destroy the system that had made those losses possible. The meeting at Dahlia's office was scheduled for 2 p.m., but I arrived an hour early to prepare. Travis had delivered additional evidence overnight. Bank records showing a pattern of similar thefts across the region, communication logs between various co-conspirators, and most importantly, recorded phone calls between Kenneth Valdres and my father discussing the timeline for my house sale. At exactly 2 p.m., Kenneth arrived with 2 attorneys and a briefcase full of documents. My parents came separately, looking nervous and avoiding eye contact. Lucan appeared through video conference from San Diego, his face tense and guarded. Dahlia had arranged for the meeting to be recorded, with all parties' consent, and she'd invited Detective Sarah Martinez from the State Financial Crimes Unit to observe. "Before we begin," I said, "I want everyone to understand that this isn't a negotiation. This is an opportunity for you to explain your actions before formal charges are filed." Kenneth's attorney started to object, but I cut him off. "I have recordings of phone calls between Kenneth and my father planning the sale of my house 8 months before it happened. I have email evidence of coordination between all the parties in this room. I have financial records showing how the criminal network operates, and I have testimony from 6 other victims of similar schemes." I played the first recording. My father's voice filled the room. "Mariel sends money every month like clockwork. She trusts us completely. We can handle the house sale and she'll never question it until it's too late to matter." Kenneth's voice responded, "The buyers are ready to move quickly once the documents are in place. Just make sure she stays overseas until everything is finalized." The silence in the room was deafening. My mother had gone pale, and my father was staring at the table. "Dad, did you just hear yourself planning to betray your daughter for money? Mariel, you have to understand, Conan's life was at stake. Conan's debts were real, but the solution was manufactured. Kenneth, do you want to explain to everyone how much profit you made buying my house below market value and reselling it?" Kenneth's attorney tried to intervene, but Kenneth held up his hand. "The house was purchased at fair market value under the circumstances. Circumstances you created by pressuring my family to sell quickly." I slid another document across the table. "This is the appraisal you commissioned before approaching my family. You knew exactly what the property was worth, and you structured the entire fraud to acquire it for 30% below value." Detective Martinez leaned forward. "Mr. Valdres, these appear to be elements of conspiracy to commit fraud, money, laundering, and racketeering. Would you like to make a statement?" "I think we should discuss a resolution that works for everyone," Kenneth said, but his confident demeanor had cracked. "The resolution is simple," I replied. "Full restitution of all stolen assets, criminal prosecution of everyone involved, and cooperation with authorities to identify other victims." Lucan's voice came through the video connection. "Mariel, I was just trying to protect my own finances when your family's situation spiraled out of control. By committing identity theft and using credit cards opened in my name to pay your divorce, lawyer? That's not protection, Lucan. That's opportunistic crime." I played another recording, this one of Lucan discussing with Kenneth how to time the divorce proceedings to maximize his financial benefit while minimizing his liability for my family's debts. "The evidence is overwhelming," Detective Martinez said. "This is the most documented case of organized financial fraud I've seen. Everyone in this room is facing serious federal charges unless there's immediate cooperation and full restitution." My father finally spoke. "What do you want from us, Mariel?" "I want you to admit what you did. I want every dollar returned that can be returned. I want my name cleared publicly. And I want assurance that this network is dismantled so no other families are victimized." Kenneth's attorney whispered urgently in his client's ear, then addressed the room. My client is prepared to discuss a comprehensive settlement that includes restitution and cooperation with authorities. And my parents? And my ex-husband? One by one, they agreed to cooperation agreements that would require full financial disclosure, public acknowledgement of their actions, and assistance with prosecuting the broader criminal network. The meeting ended with signed agreements for complete restitution, criminal cooperation, and public statements acknowledging the fraud. But more than that, it ended with the understanding that the system that had targeted vulnerable families was being exposed and dismantled. As everyone filed out, my mother approached me hesitantly. "Mariel, I know you can't forgive us, but I want you to know we never intended for it to go this far." I looked at her for a long moment. "The problem, Mom, is that you never intended for me to find out. There's a difference." For the first time since returning from Switzerland, I walked out of a room knowing that justice was finally being served. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my new house in Cedar Heights, a neighborhood across town, from where my old life had been stolen. The house was smaller than the one I'd lost, but it was mine in every sense of the word. I'd paid for it with money recovered from the restitution agreement, and every room represented a choice I'd made, freely. The legal aftermath had been swift once the evidence was presented. Kenneth Valdres pled guilty to racketeering charges and was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. His criminal network was dismantled, with federal investigators identifying 17 other victims across 3 states. My parents faced felony fraud charges, but received reduced sentences in exchange for their cooperation with ongoing investigations. Lucan was prosecuted for identity theft and ordered to pay full restitution for the credit cards he'd opened in my name. The divorce was set aside due to fraud, though I immediately filed for a legitimate divorce afterward. I had no interest in remaining married to someone who had profited from my family's betrayal. The most surprising outcome was Conan's transformation. He completed his treatment program and moved to a halfway house, where he worked as a counselor for other gambling addicts. He called me every Sunday, not to ask for forgiveness, but to report on his progress making amends to other people he'd hurt over the years. "I can't undo what was done to you," he'd said during one of our calls, "but I can make sure I never put another family through what ours went through." My relationship with my parents was more complicated. They'd lost their house to pay legal fees and restitution and were living in a small apartment downtown. I visited them occasionally, not out of forgiveness, but out of a recognition that they were still my parents, flawed and destructive as they'd been. The experience had taught me something I'd never understood before: that love without respect is not protection, and that family loyalty that requires sacrificing your own well-being is not loyalty at all. I'd started a consulting business, helping other victims of family financial fraud navigate the legal system and recover their assets. The work was personally meaningful in ways my engineering career had never been, and financially successful in ways I hadn't expected. Most importantly, I'd learned to trust my own judgment again. The people who'd betrayed me had convinced me that my independence was selfishness, that my success was luck, and that my trust was naivety. But the process of fighting back had shown me that my strength was real, my instincts were sound, and my capacity for rebuilding was greater than anyone's capacity for destruction. On Sunday evenings, I'd sit on my back porch with a cup of tea, looking out at the garden I was planting. It wasn't the elaborate landscape I'd lost, but it was growing according to my own design. In soil I'd prepared myself. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't building my future around anyone else's needs or expectations. I was building it around my own values, my own goals, and my own definition of success. And that foundation, I knew, was one that no one could steal from me. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.